Welcome everyone. My name is Rita Lambert. I'm a researcher and lecturer at the DPU. As part of today's team, we also have Alex McFarlane looking after the technical aspects, Pascal Hoffman helping us with the Q&A, and Marina Mestre and Veronica Menargues from the language team at the London Metropolitan University helping us with the translation. So a very warm welcome to Dialogues in Development. This session, this particular session is part of the DPU Urban Transformation Research Cluster. And we have the absolute honor of hosting the exclusive screening of the fantastic documentary Ciudades Infinita, Voces del Ermitaño, which translates as City Unfinished, Voices of El Ermitaño, which is directed by Catherine Golda-Pancratz and Rodrigo Flores. So today gives us that opportunity to have this longitudinal understanding of auto-constructed city and also discuss film as an urban research method. So we will first watch the film, which will last about 29 minutes, and then we'll have a discussion with our panelists who have each in their own way made great contributions to how we conceive self-built neighborhoods, and have also used film as a research method and to activate memory in Lima and Guayaquil. So a warm welcome to Professor Catherine Golda-Pancratz. She is an architect, urbanist, and urban researcher. She's a professor at the University Department of UPC Barcelona Tech and teaches at the UIC Barcelona School of Architecture, and also lectures and publishes internationally. Her research focuses on urban memory, urban culture and public space, Hispano-American urbanism, post-colonial urbanization, non-formal urbanism, and placemaking strategy. Welcome, Catherine. And secondly, we also have Professor Caroline Moser, who is an urban social anthropologist and social policy specialist. Caroline has had more than 40 years working on the interrelationship between theory and practice around the themes of gender, asset accumulation, violence, and conflicts. And Caroline was one of the producers of that beautiful, beautiful film Calle K. And in case you haven't seen it, it's an absolute must. So please do watch it. And last but not least, we have one of our very own and legendary John Turner, whose groundbreaking work and legacy has left us with a lot to build on. His 1964 film, A Roof on My Own, provides the basis for the film we are actually going to watch right now, Ciudades Infinita. So I would like to now invite Catherine to elaborate on the connection of John's work and introduce the film more thoroughly. Catherine?
Thank you very much, Rita. Well, thank you very much for organizing this session. Also, thank you for Alex for the technical issues and the DPU in general for hosting this event. And I would also like to especially thank Geoff Payne for his push to retake this event, which was canceled, in fact, in March due to COVID, and which we've now passed to this, let's say, digital format. Thank you very much, Caroline, for being here, Caroline Moser, for having, let's say, taken on this task to discuss with me afterwards on the film. And thank you very much, John, and also his wife, Beth, for being with us and for being, let's say, the core of this whole project. I just want to briefly explain that I've been collaborating with John since many years, since 2003, in fact, when I was invited to write for architectural design, exactly 40 years after his legendary, let's say, publication, and we've had many encounters since then. And having decided with two co-authors from Barcelona to interview him in 2011 for our book, which is Autoconstrucción, which translates his contemporary and historic thoughts into Spanish. And in the context of these visits and exchanges with John, his archive, let's say, brought up this UN documentary that Rita has just mentioned, The Roof of My Own, an old film from 1964, which John has written the script for, and which was at the time thought to show the audience in the United States how, let's say, Peru's Barriada process and innovative housing approaches are going onward, right? And in the end, this film was censored because of this too positive, let's say, projection of self-organization. So when seeing this old film, my first thought was, apart from the fact that I very much liked it, this film, in fact, has to go back to where it was filmed, right? It has to go back to El Ermitaño, which is the neighborhood that served as an example for the documentation of this self-built process. And I kind of took it into my hands and thought, this news story, and I'll elaborate on that a little bit later on what that means after seeing the film, has to be retold, right? So Ciudad Infinita, the film that we are now going to see, is in fact reactivating the memory of the neighborhood. And it was presented first, the work started in 2016. It was presented at the Habitat 1 conference. For that, it gained a little help from World Habitat, which was fantastic. And then it was gradually self-financed and by crowdfunding as well. The DPU helped on that as well, which I'm very thankful for. And it was also embedded into university work. And this is a point that also afterwards we will discuss with Caroline. So I'm very much looking forward to this discussion with her, in fact. So I'm not gonna extend more. I'm just now seeing how I take on my technical tasks that I have to, let's say, show and share the film. And I hope it will work technically well. And I will now, let's say, share my screen and we will be watching Ciudad Infinita. I hope you will enjoy, and I hope you will see of how it kind of reactivates and retells the story of that neighborhood from a contemporary perspective.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Such a beautiful movie. Are you now going to share the John Turners?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
so
great.
The idea is, well, John he's present, but he has said in the time we were preparing and that the time was so pressured, we have only 1 hour. He decided instead of talking in front of everybody now and maybe getting to talk too much and having to be shortened, the many things that he wanted to say, wanted to briefly bring them in a short video that he made quietly together with his 2 stepchildren, Heidi and Chris, on Sunday at home. So I'm sharing that so we can hear his voice and he will hear himself.
This Ciudad Infinita, or Infinite City, is the name given by one well-known writer on the whole issue of explosively growing urban areas in countries that are growing explosively as well. In that they're largely, we call informal, which may be just another word for being illegal, growth by squatting. And it's very difficult to control that. It goes beyond the government's capacities of ensuring it takes place in a really lasting and useful way. The news story is not about things in the past that really are relatively new, which don't ask, the questions don't ask about what has been done or what will be done, but what works, what we can do, and maybe sometimes are doing right now, that are really useful and creative. The news story, as distinct from the old ones, is about what people do and what the relationships are, and not really about things. Well, some years ago, I wrote this, I think puts it fairly clearly. When dwellers control the major decisions and are free to make their own contribution to the design, construction, or management of the housing. Both the process and the environment produced stimulate individual and social well-being. When people have no control over or responsibility for key decisions in the housing process. On the other hand, dwelling environments may instead become a barrier to personal fulfillment and a burden on the economy.
And do you still think that?
Yes. I think I was absolutely right.
So, well, thanks to John for his words. And what I just wanted briefly to connect, let's say, with what we've just seen the film. In fact, I have to say it moves me because the neighborhood has been so much affected by the COVID, and seeing them in this kind of way we've seen them. I've seen them 2 years ago, and knowing what's going on now is even continuing to tell the story, to think about what they are doing now. So this whole idea that John has been mentioning, and this has influenced me quite a lot because he has been talking about this a lot in the last years, this issue of the new story, which is on the one side very much rooted in his historic interest in storytelling, in how to transmit, let's say, stories. I would even say in the case of El Ermitaño, we can say it's even a kind of a biography of a neighborhood that we can also rewrite and transmit, right? And then also all of his involvement with Jacob von Uexküll and with the World Livelihood Award he gained in 1988, and this idea of the new story of humans, right, of the new story of people, and how to continue with that. And that also somehow was one of the back thoughts when starting also to do the documentary, the new film that you've just been seeing, right? And then the other, let's say, inspirational thought that comes from John and is in the film and is in this revisiting also of the neighborhood is this whole idea of a possibly holistic view, right? So to see the neighborhood in its context, to see the neighborhood in its physical and social landscape, ideas that John has been always coming back to from the origins of his, let's say, a preoccupation for holistic thinking from Patrick Geddes. And this idea to think that the neighborhood also, as you've seen, with all these ideas of, let's say, pre-Hispanic reminders, remains in the landscape, and then also the current threats, right, and the challenges. And in fact, I think that it is nothing that is imposed to them, let's say, through making the film. It's always everything of that is there, and you've seen that just maybe doing some of the precise and correct and good questions. All of that is there. People are thinking about it. People are worried about the environment. People are worried about the landscape. And people are very much also worried about the disintegration of their community, right? And so in some ways, the film, the only thing it is doing is reactivating these ideas and interconnecting. And that's maybe also the possibility that the film gives. It combines that with, it includes music, so it visualizes certain atmospheres and sensation, and brought people together with the screenings that we did with the old film. So let's say, literally, let's say their memories, also some of the negative memories of invading a land and of suffering and of going through that you've seen being expressed in the film, have been activated, I think, through Ciudad Infinita, and all of the rereading of the landscapes and neighborhoods that John has studied in the 1960s are also reread, let's say, through his contemporary ideas, of the ideas that we've been sharing with him in the last years, right? So maybe that's what I would like to say from my side, and pass the word back to Caroline, I guess.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Caroline, can I ask you to comment on the movie? If you can unmute yourself, Caroline.
I'm unmuted, yes?
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to look at this film. I want to thank Rita, Catherine, but also to say hello to John. It's wonderful to see you again, John. So wonderful. I think we were in touch when you were at the launch of my book about Guayaquil in 2009. So we're all still at it, and it's fantastic. So I want to start by congratulating you on this extraordinary film. It's unique and it's highly innovative because, as you can see, it takes as its starting point John's definitive legendary work, and also this UN film, which in itself is very interesting, about invasions. And it goes back to the same community, shows the film to residents, and undertakes interviews with current residents. And what this does, and I think in a way Katrine has already said this, is it reinforces and memorializes two things, both the community and its history, but also John's extraordinary work, while contextualizing it in the present. And I think this is an extraordinary thing that Katrine has done in doing this, because so much work gets lost. So I want to start by thanking you and saying what an extraordinary thing to have done. I have 2 or 3 comments because we haven't got a lot of time. I want to first just pose the question, what do we mean by documentary film? This is a documentary film. And to say that, you know, there are very big differences between what we call drama documentaries, reconstructions, and reality documentaries. And this is a reality documentary. As the title says, it gives voice to ordinary people who have their origins in the barrio and are still living there, in the barriado, and still living there. There's no narrator or front person interpreting for us what's going on. It's their voices. Documentaries increasingly use reconstruction as a device to recreate documentary stories, and this often gets conflated. And I just want to again say, for me, what is really important is City Unfinished is not a reconstruction. It compares earlier film with visuals and people talking in real time. So the focus, as we know, is following John Turner, and therefore it's on housing and the process of community invasion and consolidation of what was a marginal area in the 60s compared to now, when the same area is consolidated and integrated into the city. It uses memory, the reconstruction of memory, in a fascinating way to go back with comparative narratives. So first of all, we have two elderly people who were only 7 or 8 when the invasions happened, but still remember them with tremendous nostalgia. As young children, the organizations of the invasions, the role of community organization, the importance of the state, and the consolidation of their plots and the building of their houses. And they lament now the way community cohesion, what we call social capital, has eroded, and that people now are much more focused on their families and their households than on the community. So Silvana talks about staying there, even though there are things that now worry her. It's not tranquilo anymore. There's a lot of insecurity, but she stays there because of her family. And Domingo, I think, is a fascinating person because he shows his efforts to revive in different ways the old community spirit through street theatre, through bands. Then we have the 2nd, 3rd generation voices, and they're very different. They talk about the now and going forward. So they're not using memory in the same way. They're really talking much more about current obstacles and how to go forward. So Mariori, the young girl, talking about drugs and insecurity, but at the same time quite relaxed about the fact that she goes to school. The schools are there now, whereas in 64 they were fighting for those schools. So this is the difference that's fantastic. And also the very important interventions about uncontrollable land grabbing, the change in the way consolidation is occurring in different areas. Couple of points to finish on, which I think are really interesting and raise questions for us about the changing role of the state. And there we have a very interesting discussion about the way the housing association, the housing organization, the state through housing organization allowed people to map out and create their houses on their plots. The mayors worked a lot with local community organizations. So there was a very detailed community structure. And one asks the question, why did that happen then? And it's not the case now. Was it because of much higher concern for social justice? Was it to increase political party votes, to increase the city's labor force, or to develop a tax base? These are all questions that we can ask about what happened then that isn't happening now. Because what we have now is the retrenchment of the state. We have far erosion of rights, according to our participants, and corruption. And these are all issues which are present not just in Lima, these are present across the board. So I think this is a very interesting, for me, it flags what is so extraordinarily interesting about this film. Final couple of comments. Of course, there's wonderful stuff, as says at DRME, on changing gender roles. Did you see how in the 60s, the men were very much running the committees? And now what we see in those days, as now, the women were running the food kitchens. And talking about COVID, they've come back again, the vaso de leche, the role of women in local community organizations. However, I felt it was wonderful to end in the latter part of the film to have a younger woman community leader looking forward. Although there are a lot of challenges and there are a lot of problems, she's looking forward, she's not looking backwards. And this for me was extraordinarily important. So I want to end up by saying, overall, what I found fantastic is that this is a positive story. And for me, what was fascinating was that John's film in '64 was positive and it was blocked because it was too positive about what people were doing for themselves. This too is a positive story, and it's admirable in a world where documentary film, particularly those that get funding from resources, most frequently focus on the negatives, the exclusion, the exploitation, the conflict. So what next? It's a very modest 30 minutes and so much in it. So with trust and confidence, let's hope that there are further films. And I think flagging at the very end, these environmental issues, these green issues, the role of youth, these are all positive things that take us to the next stages in the future. So thanks, Katrina, and thanks for asking me to comment in this way.
Thank you very much. Well, I guess we should immediately start into our debate, right? Because otherwise the time is winning us. And there's so many questions of which we could talk about. But I'm also thinking that questions on the table are good to have just for all of us in general, right? So, well, we've put us 4 points, right? Maybe.
Yeah, so let's very quickly, because one of the things that Rita asked us to do, she felt was very interesting, was to talk about the role of documentary film as research. And as some of you may know, I recently completed a film on Guayaquil. And so we were going to compare the methodologies to activate memory. And very, very briefly, because I think, as you say, we want to spend most of the time with questions and answers now. In Guayaquil, what I was able to do was I was able to build on the fact that I have gone back and back and back to that same community over 40 years. We made a film back in 1978, and the recent film we made built on that, and built on the fact that we had extraordinary trust and collaboration with that community, and that this had been achieved by really going back and back again and following their lives and then following our lives. And this was a great thing to do. But I think what's fascinating in this sense, let's go to Katrine, because you have a very different experience, but have done something absolutely fascinating without that 40-year experience that I've had. So why don't you just elaborate on that for a minute or two?
Well, yes, that's right. I mean, the material is John's, the origin, right? And my experience is that I've been doing my PhD in Lima and I knew the city well. And I had already started, but also based on materials from John's archive and from his conversations with him, doing some workshops at the Universidad Nacional de Ingeniería, in fact, on urban memory, and already visited El Ermitaño at the time. And then when the film came on the table, I had already 2 former students in Lima, and I had very good friends, which I needed really to be starting to walk into the neighborhood and to start bridging and to start talking to people and to start, let's say, creating networks, right? And also finding the first people to talk to, which was the sister of Dante, and Dante is one of the voices now, right? So this whole idea, but then it was 2 years of intensive work. And I think, well, this should go on, right? And I totally appreciate and agree that this kind of making films is something that has to be rather longitudinal. It's not something you can just walk in and do something, but you have to go back and you have to really engage with people and talk to them again and bring things back on the table. So that was, let's say, the beginning. And then once I was there with the old film as a material, I was able, obviously, to get a lot of contact with people because they came to the screening. And this was then when, let's say, the new protagonists were coming up, as I didn't find so many of those people who appeared in the film, in John's film. Some of them had died, some of them were not to be found anyway. So I just decided it doesn't have to be the same person, but it's the same generation and it's a representation, right? So yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about now the different ways of making our documentary films, because they are quite different in a sense.
Right.
Do you want to kick off on that one, and then I'll follow you?
In your case, your documentary is very nicely done by your son, right? Who goes back to where he was grown up. And he's a protagonist also in the film because his relationships with people that he has been knowing years ago is back there. And that's also very nice, I think. I have, as you said clearly, and as you've seen, I did not want to appear in this film because I have nothing to do there. And also we decided that there wouldn't be a speaker like there is one in John's, in the let's say UNTV film, but rather the voices of El Ermitaño. And then of course it was not so easy, but it was only because I knew people. I asked people, do you know I connected with let's say finally with the group of people who with the team of the film, right, through other friends that I had who knew people who were doing filmmaking, who were young, who were interested. So it was also bringing together different people that I knew from before, and then starting to create a team to really engage them with. They have been doing a lot of film on Rodrigo and the people from his team. They have been doing a lot of things, but they have never walked into neighborhoods like El Ermitaño, for instance, before. But they liked the idea of going and filming and looking into a neighborhood they had probably not known as well as I had, because I have been studying them and they have been living, or they are living, in a different part of the city. So that was quite interesting as well.
Okay, so in my case, I think we called it an informal. John mentioned the word informal. And I think our film was an informal family enterprise, because what happened was that my son, you're quite right, he lived there in 1978 when he was 8 years old. And what he did was he decided that he wanted to go back. Now, I've been going back and back, but he hadn't been there for 40 years. And what he wanted to do was he wanted to find out what had happened to the kids that he had played with when he was 8 years old. And what was so extraordinary was that they were still there. And they recognized, because I've seen them over the years, we had a tremendous amount of rapport and confidence, and they were very happy for us to do it. And in a sense, this is what we call a sort of co-production, because we did it together. And, I took off a year to become a camera woman, because if I was going to film my son going back, who was going to film him? It had to be me. So I became a camera woman in order to do this. So we can all change our skills at different stages of our lives. And that allowed us. And I think the only other important thing to add is that because it was a co-production, they were very much involved in the community about what was included and was not included in the film. And in the film, there's quite a lot about corruption, and there's a lot about bribery, particularly around schooling and getting kids through the university. And we dropped some of the things because it was quite clear that they were too personal. So I think this idea that we could work in very much together in a way that we didn't in the earlier film. The earlier film with My First Husband was made for television in the UK, and although it was all involving them, it wasn't like this now. And I think this is the way we need to move forward and so on. So that I think there are some interesting differences to bring out in that. Let's quickly move, because we want to finish soon. Let's talk about film as research. And I think that what I've learned after all these years of going back and back and back and doing research is that film does something extraordinarily different. And it opens space for people to talk in very different ways. In my film, when I talked to a son about how he helped his father, he wept on film. He was tremendously emotional. He knew me very well, and he said, as you know, I'm an emotional person. And out came this extraordinary story. Similarly, the talk about drugs and drug consumption. People are very guarded. They will not talk when you do, even if you sit with them as an anthropologist and you chat, very careful. Film, in a funny way, opens up an extraordinary different way of doing research. And I want to just flag that. We can talk a lot about it, but let me turn to you, Katrine, and what from your own experience of film as research.
I totally agree. I mean, I'm coming also out of the university world, and there is parts in the film also that were added to, let's say, the maps, for instance, let's say, were added to the material that was there from the people. And this learning experience also that one has as a researcher, or in that sense, as a unwilling filmmaker, if you will, right? So this is amazing of how much also I feel I have learned from people. And I learned much more because we talked for much more, and because we had this idea of making a film. There was always this final goal that there would be a document that's also part that belongs to the community, that's part of their also, let's say, the biography of their neighborhood. So it's not something that I will put into a paper and nobody will read it, but it is something that's a visional, let's say, a tangible document, right? And even the music that's there, that was composed by, or sung by a blind woman whom I found through another man. So we had all these connections, and we had all these, let's say, sensual also experiences that you wouldn't have if you just take data and you write about certain things, right? And I think also as a learning material, a film, and I can see that now with some colleagues that say, well, this is a fantastic material also to work with students on, right? Because it sums up things that you wouldn't be able to read in let's say, in 29 minutes, right?
Yes, I've always felt that about film, but it's a bit of an uphill battle. I mean, the 1978 film we made, the DPU very loyally for a long, long period used to use it as a teaching film, but it's not across the board. People don't use film in the same way. And I think one of the wonderful things about our COVID and our isolation and webinars is we're probably much more open now to different types of film. Let's end with one quick issue about lessons for students. I feel quite passionate because nowadays when I review PhD proposals or review work by students, they are increasingly using film. I think that students really enjoy, for the reasons we described, the use of film along with their other work. But I just wanted to end with a sort of note of caution about this. Remember, what we've done, and you have done in this extraordinary way, is you have a longitudinal perspective. In your case, it was constructed with previous film, but then in my case, it was tracking over time. These are different from snapshots, when you go in with a camera and you just shoot a shot. And I think one of the challenges for students, first of all, is how do they create in that way? Secondly, how do they ensure that it's not just extractive? It is so easy for all of us just to extract from these people. And I think the third and most possibly important issue is it takes time and it costs money. And we, for instance, I think it's wonderful you got some money. We never got any money because we weren't doing something that was, you know, sexy in the sense that it was desperate. I don't want to make a film about what the good news. So, you know, the money, the editing, all of these things, I mean, look at the number of credits you gave. That's a lot of people that were involved in your film. Ours was very much a Titus and I, but I became a camera woman. He's a good editor. We just went in, the two of us. So there are different ways of doing this, but the caution for students is be very clear why you're doing it. Is it just an add-on, or is it something that's fundamental? And if it is, how do you do it? And how do you get resources and assistance in doing something that is then useful, precisely as you say, primarily for the community itself, as well, obviously, as for you, but not just extractive. So I'm going to hand you to have the last word on this one.
I totally agree, and I'm seeing so many F&A comments. So, well, I'm just saying this constructiveness, of course, the extraction is the worst thing to do, right? To use people for that's what I would always say, this is not the way to do. And obviously also the filmmaking is not an easy thing, right? It looks easy once you have a final product, right? But it's, and of course, if you just film things, you can use that, but you have to write a script, you have to really tell a story again. And this is the importance, I think. And this is not so easy to be done, not with just some mobile phone filmings. This is more of a longer research project. But still, I also think that film is a fantastic resource for working also in academic work, and to be constructive and also to bring and to give that back. That's the most important thing. So I don't know, Rita, if you haven't had us.
Thank you. I'm conscious of the time, but you have given us the most precious 1 hour together, and I wish we could just stretch it to another 3, because it's been just fantastic food for thought. And I want to thank you so much for coming together, John, Catherine, Caroline, coming together for this hour and giving us, you know, something to really look up to, something to build upon. This has been a most amazing experience. And also I want to absolutely thank the team behind us that's made it all happen. Alex, Pascal, Marina, Veronica, that have supported us so well in this session. And thank you so much. What I would like to say, though, very important, a lot of questions are arising around where they get access to your films. So John's film, A Roof of My Own, Caroline's, Kayeka, and Catherine, if you can say just quickly also where the people can access these movies and when they can watch them.
John's film is on the communityplanning.net website that's run by Nick Waits, so it's there. We can share, well, maybe Rita, you afterwards can share to the participants the links. In my case, there is still a protected Vimeo. In our case, it's still a protected Vimeo link, because we are still having it presented at festivals and so on. But I can obviously share to whom is interested. I can share the access, and I can make that available. In the case of Caroline, I think this is the same way, right? You maybe
the thing is, you see, is if you want to put it into festivals, which is a way of getting some recognition, but also for a dissemination at that level, you can't put it on YouTube. The moment you put it on YouTube, you can't do that. So like Catherine, we are really enjoying sharing it with people in different ways. I'm now using it in teaching. Yesterday I spoke to a whole bunch, 100 Manchester students with it. So I think in this way, I'm exactly the same. Rita, in my case, Titus, my son, and there's a website, and he can easily send it to you. And we are distributing it in that sense for people who really want to, rather than putting it on the YouTube. Down the line, we'll do that. But that's how we're doing it as well.
Perhaps we should have another screening of all 3 together. That would be marvelous, and having that time.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Maybe there are so many questions. I don't know, maybe you want to share them with us, or I don't know.
I don't know if there's a way, maybe after we can download the list of questions, but in terms of the session, I will just have to close it here. Sorry for not having time for questions. Good luck, everybody, and enjoy your afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rita. Take care, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for watching, for seeing us.
Lovely to see you, John. Now I can see you.
Yes, John.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Catherine.
Take care.